Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Abayim. Welcome to everybody, to all our viewers here in Montreal, in Canada, around the world, for this very unique event of an interview with Natan Sharansky and Gil Troy on their latest book, Never Alone. Before we start our event and our session here this morning in Montreal, I'd like to share with you a very short Dvar Torah from our Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem M. Schneerson, the leader of our institutions and of our generation. And that is that today we're in the parsha of Vayikra. Vayikra speaks about the different sacrifices and the different karbanot that were given by the Jewish people while they were in the desert in the Mishkan. And God in the Torah says a very, very specific commandment of the karbanot of these sacrifices. And he includes Adam ki yakriv mikem karban Hashem, a man from amongst, which will bring about from amongst you a korban, a sacrifice to God. Our rabbis asked a very simple question. If it's talking about korbanot and sacrifices, then the lingo, the language should have been kind of reverse. It should have said Adam mikem ki yakriv korban Hashem, not Adam ki yakriv mikem korban Hashem, but rather the proper text should have been Adam mikem ki yakriv korban. So from here, the Rebbe answers and explains a very beautiful explanation, and he says that the idea of bringing a korban to Hashem, to a korban, a sacrifice to God, means that Adam ki yakriv mikem, from yourself. You have to look into yourself, says the Rebbe. You have to look into your own behavior and character and conduct in life to see where you're holding in Avodat Hashem, where you're holding in the service of Hashem. And when you do, aside from being in the korban, but the message and the mission is look into yourself. Look into your character, look into your everyday doings and activities, and see where you can make yourself better in order to serve Hashem, in order to be a vessel to bring about holiness and kedusha and brachot here in this world. So our, as everybody knows, today is Rosh Chodesh, and on Rosh Chodesh is a very special day. I want to start this by saying a very, very, it's 11 o'clock in the morning in Montreal, but nevertheless, we're just going to do a very, very short l'chaim. And we did choose Smirnov today because our guests are from the holy country of Russia. So we want to give allegiance to the very special country. So I want to make a bracha of l'chaim to start off this very beautiful event, and that God should have it should be in a successful way. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech haolam shehakol niya bidvaro. L'chaim, l'chaim. Our lecture today is sponsored by the Ben Weider Memorial Lecture Series. We are the Chaim Mushta Seminary. We're the Chabad Seminary of Canada. Our mission and our vision is to take young women, train them, and give them the education to become leaders and directors in the Chabad centers and community centers around the world. The Chaim Mushta Seminary was named after the Rebbetzin, Rabbanit Chaya Mushta, which was the wife of the Rebbe, and she was her whole raison d'être and her whole mission in her life was education and educating the youth in order for them to become better Jews and better Jewesses in the communities around the world. So we're very proud that our institution carries her name, and we do our best in order to continue her momentum, continue her dream, and continue her mission of educating and reach out to as many people as possible. As well, today, as I said, the institution has a very big benefactor, Mr. Ben Weider, who has already passed a few years, but his family is very much involved in the seminary in order to support the activities and whatever missions we have in our seminary. And the Ben Weider lecture series is dedicated to the memory of Ben Weider, Ben Sion, Ben Aryeh Leib. He was a very, very dear friend of mine and of our family. We used to put on tefillin every Friday. We used to make l'chaim in his office as well. And more importantly, his vision was Jewish continuity. He tells me, Rabbi, I want you to know the reason why I'm investing in your institution is because investing in your institution is a compounded interest. So I told him, Ben, what do you mean? Can I explain what you said? He says, well, it's very simple. You're teaching classes of girls. There's 20, 25, 30 girls in each class. Each one of those girls is to become an educator. And each one of those educators is going to go in turn and teach another 25 students, whom they also will go and teach another 25 students. So every student that is being taught at the institution will eventually impact so many more lives around the world, in Montreal, in Canada, and around the world. And therefore, he put a lot of effort, he put a lot of interest, and we used to have discussions. Although he was a very worldly man, he had businesses all over the world. As he was the president of the IFBB. Those who know the Weider company, Joe Weider and Ben Weider, they're the pioneers of bodybuilding and weightlifting. But nonetheless, he gave time and he made time for Yiddishkeit, to put on tefillin, to say Shema Yisrael, matzah on Pesach, hamantash on Purim, candles on Hanukkah. He would come to our house for Shabbos. The idea is he was a very noble person, Ben Weider, the family, and also he was a very traditional person with ethics and values. And in short, Ben Weider was a good man. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the moderator for today, Mrs. Barbara Kay, whom I just had the pleasure of meeting just a few days ago, and I want to thank her publicly for accepting to be the moderator for us today with Mr. Natan Sharansky and Professor Gil Troy. Barbara is a journalist and author in Montreal. She's a regular columnist with the National Post, the postmillennial.com, and the Epoch Times. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, please welcome Barbara Kay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to have the privilege of moderating this webinar with Mr. Sharansky and Professor Troy, and also to meet you, Rabbi, and hear about your organization and the good work that it does. Never Alone, which is our book topic today, is a beautifully written and deeply absorbing book chronicling the life of one of history's greatest freedom fighters through 9 years each of life in the Soviet prison system, then in politics, and then again on the front lines of the battle against global anti-Semitism. I'll give both short bios, before doing a brief synopsis of the book and then getting into our discussion. Natan Sharansky is an Israeli politician, human rights activist, and author who, as a refusenik in the Soviet Union during the 1970s and 80s, spent 9 years in Soviet prisons. He served as chair of the executive of the Jewish Agency from June 2009 to August 2018. Mr. Sharansky currently serves as the chairman of the Institute of the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. In 1995, he co-founded the Yisrael B'Aliyah political party, which won 7 seats in the Knesset in 1996. He served as a cabinet minister under Prime Minister Ariel Sharon between 2003 and 2005. He left the Knesset in 2006. He has so many awards and honors that I would be here all morning if I even began to mention them. Professor Gil Troy is a distinguished scholar in North American history at McGill University, where he taught for many years before making Aliyah to Israel. That was 13 years ago. Came on a sabbatical and stayed. Gil Troy is an award-winning American presidential historian and a leading Zionist activist. Recently designated an Allgemeiner J100, that is one of the top 100 people, quote, positively influencing Jewish life. He has published essays in the American, Canadian, and Israeli media, including writing essays for the New York Times. He wrote a weekly column for the Daily Beast called Secret Lives, putting current events into historical perspective, and he writes a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post. He is the author of 7 books and also has garnered many awards and honors for his work. Together, these 2 distinguished gentlemen co-wrote Never Alone, Prison, Politics, and My People. Just a brief synopsis of the book. In 1977, Natan Sharansky, a leading activist in the democratic dissident movement in the Soviet Union and the movement for Jewish emigration, was arrested by the KGB. He spent 9 years as a political prisoner, convicted of treason against the state. Every day, Sharansky fought for individual freedom in the face of tyranny, a struggle that would come to define the rest of his life. Never Alone reveals how Sharansky's years in prison, many spent in harsh solitary confinement, prepared him for a very public life after his release. As an Israeli politician and the head of the Jewish Agency, Mr. Sharansky brought extraordinary moral clarity and uncompromising, often uncomfortable honesty to his work. His story is suffused with reflections from his time as a political prisoner, from his seat at the table as history unfolded in Israel and the Middle East, and from his passionate efforts to unite the Jewish people. Written with frankness, affection, and humor, the book offers profound insights from a man who embraced the essential human struggle to find his own voice, his own faith, and the people to whom he belongs with all his heart and soul. I'm going to ask questions to our guests. I have 6 questions today. 3 are for Mr. Sharansky, 2 are for Professor Troy, and 1 is for both or either of our authors. If we pace ourselves with about 7 minutes per answer, we'll have time for more reflections from Rabbi Cohen, so let's get started. My first question is for Mr. Sharansky, and rather than ask you to describe your time in prison in the Soviet Union, I would like to take you back to your trip to Russia in 1997 as a free man and Israel's new Minister of Trade. It was an emotional trip for you and your wife, Avital. You visited the grave of your father, who died during your incarceration. You visited the grave of your beloved mentor, the great scientist and dissident Andrei Sakharov, whose funeral you had not been allowed to attend. And you even visited your old punishment cell in the Lefortovo prison. Please tell us a bit about that trip, what it meant to you, but please also include how your little book of Psalms became a talisman for your refusal to be fined by others, and what it symbolizes for you.
Well, Barbara, thank you for your question. But if in every question it will be us putting so many questions together, it will be very difficult to do it in 7 minutes, but I'll try. But before, I have to say that I am very impressed by the rabbi's presentation of the great work that Chabad does. But I have one comment. You know, we have today such great wines in Israel, hundreds and hundreds of great wines. And so when you are making kiddush, making l'chaim, there is no need to go to Russian vodka. You can use Israeli wines. Now, yes, it was interesting that first time that I came back to the former Soviet Union after a very dramatic day. I was taken straight from prison and brought by the airplane to Germany, and then on the bridge met my wife, whom I didn't see for 12 years, and that evening landed in Israel, greeted by all Jewish people, and the day which started in Soviet prison finished near the Kotel. So it was a very exciting day, but then it took me more than 10 years to go back. In fact, I did want to go back when my teacher and mentor, Andrei Sakharov, passed away, but it was only 2 years after my release. I was still considered the big criminal. I was not permitted. Then regime changed in the Soviet Union. In fact, Soviet Union stopped to exist. They started inviting me, but I was not really interested. And then I'm a minister, and we have important trade negotiations, and I'm invited, but I put a condition. I want to visit Soviet KGB prison, where I spent a year and a half of interrogations, very difficult times. So I put a condition. I'll come if I'll visit this prison. It took them time to agree. Finally, they agreed. When I came to this prison after meeting the foreign minister, after negotiating trade deals, after meeting with Jewish community. We are coming to prison, and I take my wife to punishing cell, a very tough punishing cell with the most difficult memories of those interrogations. And then when I go out, there are many journalists who are asking, first of all, it was the first and the last time in the history of this prison that somebody's official visitor there, who was there before as a prisoner. And they're asking me, why are you doing it? Is it self-torture? Is it hard experience? I said, to the contrary, it is so inspiring. Only think for a moment. Here was the biggest empire, totalitarian regime, controls 1/3 of the world. KGB is the most powerful secret police in the world. Tens of millions of people are victims, direct victims of this organization. And here, 17 leading interrogators of the KGB are telling me that everything is finished. Every Zionist is arrested. The Jews of the world are afraid even to mention our names. There will be no more Zionism in the Soviet Union. You will never be alive if you will not cooperate with us. And formally, I don't know anything what's happening in the world. But I'm absolutely sure that Jewish people continue their struggle. And 20 years passed, Soviet Union doesn't exist, KGB doesn't exist. 1 million Jews moved from Soviet Union to Israel. Another million moved to the other countries. And all the world is a much more free place. And that all started from the fact that a group of Jews in Soviet Union went back to their identity and felt themselves very proud for belonging to their people and to their state and to their faith. And Jews of the world supported them in this struggle. And that reminds us how powerful we are. Just in the week before Pesach, it's important to remember that these miracles happened not only in ancient Egypt, it happened in our generation. So that was the main motto and enthusiasm and inspiration which I got from that trip. But of course, in that trip, as all my life, then there is a small sound book together with me. I received it few days before my arrest. I didn't know that I'll be arrested. From some American tourist with a note from my wife, who was in Israel already, that she has a feeling that this book, which was with her, that's the time to send it to me. And I had no idea what she's talking about. I opened this book. It's too difficult for me to read. I know what my Hebrew is all about: protests, demonstrations, refusal for Aliyah, and so on. And nobody even taught me how to understand where there is the beginning and the end of the sentence. And I'm very busy with demonstrations, with press conferences, with our political struggle. So I put it aside. And some days after this, I'm arrested. And then I remember about that note. And then I start demanding that they'll bring it back to me. And they gave it to me back. 3 years it took me to fight for my right to get it back. They brought it to me together with a telegram that my father passed away. And so I decided immediately that what can I do? I cannot be with my mother, can't be with my family. I will be reading this book until I understand. And here I'm looking at this book, small book with hundreds of thousands of words, with millions of letters. And it's like an ocean of letters. And I don't know where is the beginning of that. And I'm a mathematician, so I get the word that I know, and then I put it in every place and compare with the other words in order to understand the sense. And so the first phrase, which I understood fully, was 13 short words. Gam ki elech bagei tzal mavet lo irara ki atay madi. And when I go through the valley of death, fear no evil, because no, I am with you. Who is I? It can be Avital, it can be King David, it can be people of Israel, it can be Kadosh Baruch Hu. All of them together are coming to my cell. It cannot be coincidence. What is the probability that that will be the first phrase which I understand? So from that, I will never permit them to take it from me, and that was the only piece of property which I brought with me from Soviet Union, and it's always with me. Okay.
That is a beautiful story. I love it.
Yeah.
I I also remember that you wouldn't let them take it away from you, and you lay down in the snow at one point. They wanted to take it away.
But they took me to the airplane, and they took all my prison clothes and gave me civil clothes. And I understand something very dramatic is happening. And then I realized that when they took all the clothes, they also took my soundbook. And who knows, I cannot be without it. Who knows how many, I don't know what is happening with me. So, but in any way, I don't want to be without the source of my strength. So I lied in the snow near the airplane. They brought it to me. They didn't care really. They simply took everything. Okay, if it is, and that was the only piece of my property that I brought with me.
Anyways, it's a great story because you were this close to freedom and you weren't going without that book. I think most people would have just jumped on that plane with or without the book. So happy to get out. So my next question is for Professor Troy. This book has been described as a love letter to the Jewish people and to the state of Israel. You and Natan Sharansky are both ardent Zionists, but you've come to your Zionist calling from such radically different backgrounds. So tell us a bit about how this marvelous partnership and friendship came to be, and a bit about how the collaboration, it was a very complex, it's a long book and very full book. And no, I myself couldn't say who wrote what or tell us a little bit about how it came to be.
Chodesh Tov, it's really an honor to celebrate Nisan, the month of freedom, building up to our Festival of Freedom with all of you, especially you, Barbara, because we know your voice has been so important for decades now in the National Post, but throughout Canada and especially in Quebec, standing up for what's right, standing up for freedom, standing up not just for the Jewish people, but really for democratic values. So it's really a pleasure and honor to be with you. And Rabbi, to all my Chabad friends, I too would be happy to raise a glass of Israeli wine to celebrate this Chag.
L'chaim.
I had many l'chaims at Trout Lake with my Chabad friends and my Chabad family, and I'm sending them love today here from Jerusalem. So indeed, we come from two very different worlds. Natan was born into a town which at the time was called Stalino. Today it's Donetsk, in the Soviet Union, that vast prison camp. And I was born into the great shopping mall of North America. I spent the 1980s at Harvard studying American history. Natan Sharansky spent much of the 1980s when he was Anatoly Sharansky in the prison system, the Gulag, as he was talking about it. But of course, he often points out that means that he had moral clarity in the Gulag, and I didn't have moral clarity. I had moral confusion at Harvard. The interesting thing is that for all our differences, we meet in Jerusalem as neighbors, and we meet on this platform of love of the Jewish people. And we had many differences in the 3 years of writing the book. Differences in tone, differences in style, and differences in strategy. We did not have one ideological debate. We didn't have one ideological difference. We had a similar commitment to the Jewish people, to the state of Israel, to Judaism, and to continuity. As you said so eloquently, Rabbi, about Ben Weider, who of course was a legendary figure in Montreal, and that the Weider family's legend continues. And it gets to the heart of the title. The book is never alone. Why? Because I'm sitting in Los Angeles with my friend David Suissa, also a Montrealer. So we started by talking about bagels, and he says, "Tell me about the book," because the original title was, as Barbara said, the book is organized 999, 9 years in Gulag, 9 years in Israeli politics, 9 years in Jewish agency. We literally signed a book contract with the top New York publisher, 999. But I didn't like it because you can't have a title that's an inside joke. You can't have a title that our Christian friends might look 666, think it's the devil. Our German friends will go 999, it's too negative. So he's saying, well, tell me about the book. And I tell one of the stories of Natan being in the prison and being told again and again by the KGB, who are in a sense his only lifeline to the real world, right? Because they go out and back and forth every day, and he has no contact. He's cut off from his loved ones. He's cut off from the Jewish people. And he's told again and again, you're forgotten, you're abandoned, you're alone. And as you heard with the story of the Psalms, he knew he was never alone. It was a matter of the Jewish people being with him, and of course, his faith in God. And I tell this to David Suisse, and he goes, that's it. For 75 years, we've been focusing on never again. And of course, we honor our Holocaust martyrs, but we're not just anti-Semites. We're not just anti-Zionists. We have a positive vision, and the positive vision is never alone. That when you are lucky enough to be born into this amazing network called the Jewish people, or choose to sign up and convert, you belong to this family, this extended family. And the theme of the book is about the power of Jewish peoplehood, but it's also about the power of machloket, of disagreement, that we need to have unity, but not uniformity, that we can learn as our ancestors did in the Talmud, as our ancestors did in the Bible, as our ancestors did in the Kilot, in the communities all over the world, to disagree, but also to keep our eye on the prize. And that, of course, was also what happened in the Soviet Jewish movement. We all yelled and screamed, "Shlachat ami, let my people go." But it didn't mean that we were all praying in the exact same way. It didn't mean that we were all politically on the exact same page. We had certain things that united us and certain things that divided us. And today, we define one another by the divisions. And the challenge is to define one another by the unity that unites us. And that's one of the things I learned from the Rebbe. I grew up in Queens, not in Brooklyn, but the shadow of the Rebbe, of course, was great. And the fact that he taught us there's no such thing as a bad Jew. And I remember going from Salman Schechter School of Queens, which is a conservative Jewish day school, if I may say so, to Brooklyn, and being told by one of the Rebbe's, emissaries who met with us about the nitzotz, the spark within every one of us from this great man. And that's and Natan's story also is about the spark being extinguished by Stalin, or at least trying to have it extinguished by Stalin, and it wouldn't go out. And when he had the opportunity to have that light in his eyes, he and the refuseniks had that light in their eyes. And of course, today, Natan and I spend a lot of time with young students, birthright students, Masah students, who come to Israel, and we see that same light in their eyes. And we invite them into the Jewish people, invite them into the story of Israel, because you're never alone.
That's beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Sharansky, the wave of, speaking of disagreements within the family, the wave of Russian immigration to Israel was a huge triumph, but also a big challenge for the party that you created to represent them. Clashes with the ultra-Orthodox and the Mizrahim made you, quote, very uncomfortable, undoing all the unity I believed in. So tell us a little about these challenges and how have they been resolved?
Well, first of all, I have to say it's for the one who is coming from the Soviet Union, when all the power of our struggle was in this idea of unity. If somebody, when I'm in the prison, in the cell, will ask me, but to whom you feel more closeness, to Likud, to Jews of Likud, or Jews of Avodah, to Jews, to Orthodox Jews, or to Reform Jews? I will not even understand what he's talking about, because all these years of struggle taught me how it is important that all these different organizations who disagreed with one another, argued with one another. But in the end, it was the Jews who were coming to us to bring us information, to take information about our letters to the world. It was the Jews who pressed on their governments, and there was no difference. It was any division. If I'll start dividing between them, it will weaken me. You feel it very strongly how, in fact, after all, these organizations can argue between themselves and not to trust one another. And we speak a lot about in this book about disagreements which existed among different organizations fighting for us. But in the end, in the KGB files, they were all on the same page, because for KGB it was all one movement, anti-Soviet movement, which was trying to bring down Iron Curtain. And all our strength was in this unity. Then you're coming to Israel, and we continue our struggle, and we continue struggle to bring down the Iron Curtain. We organize this biggest demonstration in the history of American Jewry in Washington when Soviet leader comes. And finally, the Iron Curtain is falling, and all these Jews are coming in hundreds of thousands, are coming to Israel. Then you can see that there is a lot of frictions. Society loves, society is very happy, but inevitably, when such a big number of new immigrants is coming, there is suddenly a lot of frictions and a lot of distrust and a lot of complaints from both sides. And somehow you understand, we are trying to help to everybody, but if you really want to help, you must have political influence. If you really want to change priorities of the country, what to do? You have to go to the politics. But you don't want, because what is party? What is part of the people? You have to start speaking on behalf of part of the people. And that was my big challenge. First of all, it took me a few years before I even agreed with the idea that we must have this party. Then we agreed that it must be for a very short period of time in order to open, to destroy all these barriers and to be part of decision making. The best absorption, that what we decided, is when we are all sitting together at the table which decisions are made, and where we are sitting together with religious parties, with right-wing parties, with left-wing parties, and together making decisions. That's when real integration is taking place. And from this point, our party was big success. But in practical political life, you have, on one hand, to make many compromises with your partners. On the other hand, sometimes to be very outspoken in campaigning for your votes and criticizing the other parties. And as I described in this book, there were some very difficult moments for me, whether when my colleagues demanded that we will go very harsh in criticizing sometimes ultra-Orthodox parties or left-wing parties, and we had to criticize when we disagreed, and on the other hand, how to do it, not undermining this feeling, overriding feeling of unity, of one family, of one purpose. And I think from this point, in fact, the life of dissident in politics is always difficult, because as a dissident, you had to be non-compromising with KGB and very connected with your people. As a politician, you have to make everyday compromise, otherwise politics couldn't succeed. And at the same time, to be ready to argue, to disagree publicly with big groups of your own people, your family. That was a big challenge. But I have to say, when I sometimes see today some of the people we are just now in the middle of another political campaign just before elections, and some of the rhetorics is very vicious, and some of our secular leaders are trying to get a lot of votes by being almost on the border of anti-Semitism, criticizing religious parties. And then they say to me, but didn't you have the same problem? I always say, no, we never had. We had the problem how to be together, how to disagree, remaining one family. And I think that's one of the big challenges for every politician. And definitely, from this point, this history of the struggle for Soviet Jewry helped me a lot in politics to try to keep this overwhelming feeling that we are one family, whatever our disagreements, and later in the dialogues and some attempts to bring more close the Jews of diaspora and the state of Israel.
Thank you. Gil, anti-Semitism is, as you have noted, you call it a very plastic kind of hatred, and anti-Zionism is its new toxic face. So we know that a lot of the global anti-Semitism we see today can be traced to the university campuses. In the book, you note that Marxism used to appeal to the workers of the world, but today the new Marxism appeals to, quote, victims of the racist, colonialist, imperialist, capitalist, sexist, homophobic democracies. So Israel is routinely accused of all these evils, and you've had years of experience in pushing back against the anti-Zionist narratives. I'd be interested to know what strategies you find that work the best, because I know a lot of students here are very frustrated. Pro-Israel students are frustrated, and they often feel it's too big a struggle, too much for them to push back on. So please enlighten us about your work with the campuses.
Well, thank you. And again, you've been an amazing partner in that fight, a leader in the fight. First, let's look at it from Natan Sharansky's perspective. Natan, when he was in the Soviet Union, saw the way Stalin and then Khrushchev and then Brezhnev and all the other communists used anti-Semitism as a tool, as the dictator's tool, as the oppressor's tool. And he associated anti-Semitism with dictatorship. Imagine what a shock it must have been to leave the Soviet Union, to come to the free West and see anti-Semitism alive, adapted, functioning in a slightly different way, but still alive. And that's why we call it a plastic hatred. We're building off the work of Robert Wistrich, the great late historian, who talked about anti-Semitism as the longest hatred. But it's not only the longest hatred, it's that it's plastic, it's adaptable. It works in the West and it works in the East. It finger points at Jews as communists, and it finger points at Jews as Rothschilds, as capitalists. It finger points at Jews when all of a sudden there's an eruption of race issues in the United States of America and George Floyd is tragically killed. Somehow it's our responsibility. The Israeli defense forces are supposedly training the American police, and that's why they're racist, as if there's not I'm an American historian, a 300-year history of racism before that. You have this awful COVID outbreak, and they start calling it the Jew flu and COVID 48. 48 being, of course, 1948, the year Israel was established. How is it that it's always us? And then on top of that, the phenomenon of doublethink. That in the Soviet Union, you don't tell others what you think because you can get your head separated from your shoulders in a very violent way. And to come to the universities, again, you're Natan Sharansky in your first trips, the first times you come, you're toasted, you're roasted for your amazing work in the 1980s, but you come back in 2000 and all of a sudden you meet students at McGill University, at York University, at Harvard University, at Rutgers University, who are hiding what they really think. Shh, I can't be honest. It's devastating. And the fact that it doesn't come from the top, because in the United States, in Canada, in England, in Australia, we live in free democracies, but it comes from professors, it comes from peers, and now it comes from social media, devastating. So 2 quick approaches for students. Number 1, as I said earlier, don't define yourself by the enemies. The great New York Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, why do we always focus on the accused? Let's point at the accuser and say, what's wrong with you? But rather than just doing that, we also have to say, what's good about us? And the whole message of Never Alone is what I call Pilates Judaism, Pilates Zionism. Build up our core strength. The more Shabbat dinners we have, the more Pesach Seders we have, the more conversations we have, what I call Zionist salons, reading the Zionist ideas and talking about what this means to me, to us, and putting all the static, putting all the hatred, putting all the outside powers and fears and attacks away, the stronger we are. And that's the biggest mistake we make in university today. It's the biggest mistake we made, I'm sorry to say, in many Jewish day schools. We're so busy teaching about them and their hatred, we forget to build up about us. And one of the things in the last third of the book that Natan, again, we come from very different worlds, but Natan and the Jewish Agency is building up identity. And I get involved with Birthright as an extension of my anti-Israel work on campus, because it has to be pro. So the most important message is to build yourselves up. The most important message is not to let them define the standards and the stakes, but to focus on yourselves, on the Jewish people, and also on, now this is not just a fight for Jewish people. This is a fight for core democratic ideals. This is the fight for the soul of the university. This is the fight for an opportunity to have true free speech.
Well, yes, and I think you're quite right that it is evolving even as we speak, and it is a lot about free speech, but it is also about critical race theory, where Jews are lumped in with white supremacists, who in turn treat Jews as part of, as vermin. You will not replace us. we're in a whole new ballgame now. A lot of it is created by social media. That's something that I find bewildering. Cancel culture as it evolves all the time, and I find it very interesting that the Jews, people don't quite know what to do with the Jews, because there's the oppressor class and there's the oppressed. Well, we're a minority that has known a great deal of oppression, and at the same time, we're successful. So it seems like almost like a rebuke when a minority, like the Asians as well, you know, at Harvard, the troubles they're having. So it seems like a rebuke in this philosophy, in this ideology.
Right.
To be successful, you must, in a way, be associated with the oppressor class, because the only thing that can explain your success is inordinate power. So do you find that you're having to kind of shape your message in a new way? I mean, over the last, it's moving very quickly, this whole new woke. So how are you refining your message to deal with that aspect?
So the first part hasn't had to be refined, right? The first Pilates message of build, what I call identity Zionism, is what I said 20 years ago when I wrote my essay, Why I'm a Zionist, and continues today. But you're absolutely right, because it has changed. Now, first of all, let's acknowledge we're doing a public service at a time when left and right can't agree on anything. They can agree, far left and far right, on hating Jews. But we have to call that out, right? We have to say, how is it that and then what else do? They take, you're right, they take our success and they turn it against us. Why? And it goes back to the quote that you had about Marxism. Marx said it's all ultimately about power. And he said ultimately it's about class struggle. And now they've said it's about racial struggle and other forms of struggle. But what do? The insidious thing about these woke people and the totalitarian bullies of the right is they take ideas like privilege. It's true. When a white person walks down the streets of New York, as opposed to an African-American person, they have certain privileges. But if that white person is a nobody like Gil Troy and that black person is Beyonce or Barack Obama, it's not only about race. But you take that and you all of a sudden add that word white and white privilege, and now the Jews have white privilege. Well, first of all, that negates all those Jews and in Israel and in Montreal and all over the world who come from Arab lands, who might have darker skins, right? And then when you say that, all of a sudden Natan points out, wait a minute, why are you saying that? You're essentially saying, oh, it would be valid if we were only white, right? You see how we fall into, I took that example on purpose, because you see how we fall into it? They set up this thing, they say, oh, white privilege. Well, we're not really white. No. Why are we accepting whiteness as some kind of crime? Why accepting whiteness as some kind of thing that defines someone born in the Soviet Union and somebody born in Montreal and somebody born in New York? And there might be left-wingers, there might be right-wingers. So that's the thing. It's an essentialism. And academics have spent a lot of time saying, don't be essentialist. Don't define someone only as a woman, only as gay. But all of a sudden, when it's convenient, they do. So what do we have to do? In very short, we have to learn better. We have to really go in. And I acknowledge that underlying it, there's something to be said about intersectionality. There's something to be said about privilege. But the insidious thing is you distort it and you go extreme. And we have to be much more subtle, much more nimble, and go from within. And as an academic, I always bore from within and call them out and name and shame and say, this is too much. But at the end of the day, we're not going to solve the problem, but we can at least put a finger in the dike and say, wait a minute, this is too much. We also have done a terrible job, I'll finish with this, of making allies. We should be working with other groups, like you said, Asian Americans. We should be teaching our friends from Hong Kong who live in the United States the lessons of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Jewish movement, to fight what China's doing to Hong Kong. And by the way, Natan has been in contact with Jimmy Lai, who's really one of these great heroes standing up for human rights in Hong Kong. We should be aligning in that way. We should be aligning at the university. And we should also do a much better job of speaking to alumni, speaking to administrators, speaking to those few professors who might be on our side, and calling out what I call educational malpractice. Because if I stand up and I use my academic podium as a political platform, I'm not serving my McGill students. I'm not serving my Concordia students. I'm not serving my York University students. I'm serving myself.
Well, thank you. I think the university professors might be a lost cause, but I'm really thrilled to hear that, Natan, that you are doing your part to extend help. I think the people of Hong Kong, I think that's a brilliant message. I love the idea of this allyship because the Jews know a lot about dissidents and organizing in dissidents, probably more than almost any other group in the world. I can't think of another group. So what a great use of your talents, if I may say so. That's the world needs more of it. And you're right. Why aren't we reaching out more to form alliances? Thanks for that great thought. Okay. So this question will be for either one of you. When I spoke with Rabbi Cohen beforehand, we talked, there were two themes that he was very eager to see discussed, and one was pride in being Jewish, and one was continuity. And I agree that these are the two big messages, and I know that they are messages in your books as well. But when I think about the difference between the diaspora and Israel, I don't think in Israel the question of continuity as a Jew comes up very much. It's what kind of Jew you want to be in Israel, but nobody is questioning their actual membership in the Jewish people. That's a given. But in the U.S. and Canada and other parts of the diaspora, this whole idea of it's not taken for granted at all. This idea that you are going to continue to be Jewish, or that your kids are, or that you're going to care if your kids are, apart from the very Orthodox communities, and all these systems that these Marxist ideas have been, I think, very invasive in terms of convincing people, young people, that particularism of any kind, it's only good if you're an oppressed people, but Zionism has become such a dirty word in so many circles, and it doesn't matter. You have to be very strong to make Zionism a point of pride in your public life, without, as we saw with Barry Weiss, for example, at the New York Times, a brilliant writer and a great opinion editor who canceled herself. Cancel culture is something, who canceled herself because of the harassment that she was receiving from her colleagues, and management did nothing about it, but specifically for her pro-Israel views. On the intersectional hierarchy, she's a woman, she's a lesbian, but her pro-Israel views did her in, and actually she had to cancel herself. I'm sorry if that seems a bit rambly, but it's very clear that assimilation is the biggest problem. Never mind standing up for Israel or not, that is the biggest problem. And without pride in our Jewish particularism and love of Israel, there doesn't seem to be much hope of Jewish continuity here. So it's kind of symbolic that Israel is 100% vaccinated against COVID, while we lag far behind. So I guess my question is there a vaccine against the impulse to assimilation and the failure to consider continuity a principal value amongst Jews in the diaspora? And are we slated realistically to kind of disappear in a sense? Those who are not religiously affiliated. I mean, is the diaspora a dying beast?
Okay.
Either of them.
Of course, there is vaccine. Of course, there is vaccine. I got to say, I was in many Jewish communities, almost in all Jewish communities in the world, while being the head of Jewish agency, and even before I traveled in many Jewish communities in America, in Canada, in Australia, in South Africa, in France, in England, practically, of course, in Russia and Ukraine. And assimilation is global phenomenon. The only Jewish community which is not shrinking is, of course, Jews of Israel. So it is global phenomenon. But you can also see that with all the efforts to stop this assimilation or to work to strengthen your community, there are only two real tools which Rabbi Cohen or any other rabbi or community organizer have. And these are faith and Zionism. Connection to tradition in any way, but that you feel yourself that you're part of this tradition. You're part of this family of thousands of years ago, and you continue. And connection to the state of Israel. If you have both, you can be sure that the future of your grandchildren is guaranteed. If you have one of the things, well, there are many opportunities and many great organizations which are working to add another. But if you don't have both, if you're not interested in tradition and you're not interested in the state of Israel, your grandchildren will not be Jewish. That's statistics which is true for France, for Russia, for America, for Montreal, for South Africa, everywhere. I saw how it works everywhere. And by the way, that was the idea of birthrights. After all, two Jews, one of them from Montreal, one from New York, who definitely were not Orthodox. One of them was against religion, another was probably a member of Reform Shul in Montreal, I think. But they discovered that they really didn't succeed to make their children feel proud or felt belonging to Jewish people. And when their children were coming to Israel, it was changing. Suddenly, it is so easy to feel what a history there is, what a family it is, how interesting it is to be part of Jewish people. So that's how idea of birthrights and Masa and many other projects that I also was involved in developing. And the idea is to make people feel that it's interesting. It makes your life much more deeper, much more meaningful when you're part of the family. I also believe, and we write about it in the book and in the other books also, that every person, really every person, not only Jew, every person has two basic desires. Desire to be free and the desire to belong. The desire to be free, that nobody will decide for me what to think and what to say. And desire to belong, that not only my only physical life matters, that I'm part of some group of people of faith, or group of people of community, or professional group, that I belong to some group which makes my life more meaningful. And so that is deep desire of every person. And as the one who lived without freedom, without identity, I know how life without this makes it empty and how you cannot fight for anything. When I found strength to fight for anything, for my own freedom, only when suddenly I felt that there is people behind me, that there is family, that there is history, and there is state. So we Jews are lucky. We have such a unique identity. By the way, today it's very popular to speak about bad identities or good identities. I think every identity is good, meaning that it gives to person this feeling of belonging to something bigger than your own physical life. But Jews are lucky. Those who were born in Israel, those who were born in any other place. For free, we can have such an interesting identity. I remember how it happened to me, that after 1967, I had nothing. I had only how to succeed in my profession. And suddenly, only some switch in your mind, and you have thousands of years of history, and it's so interesting, so cool to be part of this history. And you have all these people from all over the world who are saying, oh, your father is from Odessa, my father is from Odessa, we are family, we want to help you. And you have state which is ready to send airplanes to the end of the world, but to help you. So you have for free, you have such unique opportunity which doesn't cost you anything, to be part of something much bigger than your life. So I'm sure that we can, that with the right way of using this vaccine of faith and Zionism, we can make healthy every Jew in the world.
Amen.
Thank you. That's terrific. Well, I guess, Rabbi, do I have time for one more question, or do you want to?
Yes, you do have time for one more question, but I just wanted to interject for just one moment. When Professor Gil was talking, and then Natan followed later on, it reminded me a word that I heard once from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. He just passed away not too long ago. So he said like this: non-Jews are of Jews that are proud of their Judaism, and non-Jews are embarrassed of Jews that are embarrassed of their Judaism. In every sense of the word, in every sense of one's life, you have to have a pride of who you are. It doesn't mean you have to go with payas and with tzitzis and all that. It means be proud inside of you of who you are and what you represent. And eventually, yes, eventually do mitzvah, do Torah. But the idea is don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. When you have a pride inside of you of sitting down and eating matzah by the Seder, saying Kaddish for the yahrzeit of your parents, of your grandfather, whatever it is, have a pride in what you are and who you are. And when you have that pride will bring you closer and bigger and better to missions and to goals in life that you would never reach if you weren't as such. And let me just well, I'm not going to say the story because I want Barbara to continue with the question.
Well, I was just going to ask.
I want to continue your quote. Lord Sachs once took me to Archbishop of Canterbury. That is the top official of Christian authority in England. When I came to England to help him to fight anti-Semitism in England, and I said, so from the airport, he said, before we'll go to Jewish organizations, I want you to take that. And really, that's exactly what just quoted, that these non-Jews are envious when they hear the stories of real Emunah. That's why he wanted me to tell the story about Tehillim and about solidarity of Jewish people when we were in prison, how we are never alone. He was full of envy. And you think that there are so many Jews in England at that moment, in academy, in Oxford, were trying to find, to be liked by their neighbors by saying, no, I have nothing to do with this awful state and with these problematic people. And so that's exactly the illustration to this quote. He understood that the way to make the leaders of the world to support us is not by running away from our identity. To the contrary, to show them how deep our identity is.
And that's why, Natan, I have to tell you, when the Rebbe came out with the idea of making public menorah lighting in public squares, whether it's Russia, New York, Montreal, Singapore, Budapest, wherever you may be, you know why? It brought out the neshama of the Jew. It brought out the pride of the Jew. The candles were burning. The flame was kindling their Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbe saw the Rebbe turned crisis into opportunity. And that's what we are as Chabad Shluchim, with the mission to take any situation and reverse it. Don't go with the flow. Like Barbara was saying before, don't take the view of the oppressor and identify yourself by the oppressor. I'm sorry, I don't know if it was Gil or Barbara. Don't identify by the oppressor. Identify by who you are and what you are and be proud of it. And then when you're proud of it, you're going to create a movement. The movement, whether in your family, in your friends, and people around you, and that's the beauty of the neshama.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay,
Go ahead,
all right. I just the final question might seem like going from the poetic to the very prosaic, but since the last time I spoke to both of you, there's a new American president. The Abraham Accords are now seem to be in real operation, and the effect that this will have on anti-Zionism may be quite profound in the university, since it's hard to keep a hatred of Israel going when all the Arab states around the Palestinians have decided that Israel isn't worth hating anymore. So maybe a comment just on what you can expect from the new president and how the Abraham Accords are going to shape the general culture in Israel's environment and what that.
Well, I think Professor Gil Troy, his specialty is to speak about past American presidents, so he knows more also about this. But I only want to say a short comment. Senator Biden, I know for all these years that I was released from prison, first time when I came to America, he was already senator, and then as a vice president. So as we were speaking, giving interviews before election, we didn't think that there is something to be afraid of him, for sure. The thing is whether this progressive anti-Semitic part of his party will have any influence. In the meantime, I have to say one of the most, maybe the most important, not surprise, but step from my point of view, very positive step, which President Biden did, he fully accepted international definition of anti-Semitism. Well, we wrote about it in our book, and I was involved in all these debates around this definition. But one can say, no, what already 40 countries, so many universities in England recognize it. Not in America, by the way. But so what's the big deal? The big deal is that when President Trump recognized international definition of anti-Semitism, there was awful reaction. When it was what he wants to define us as a nationality, not as a religion, and so because everything what was Trump was doing was viewed as a bad sign, so suddenly even the recognition of the international definition of anti-Semitism was viewed as right-wing provocation. And I have to say, for shlichim of Jewish agency in the campuses, and I'm sure that shlichim of Chabad on the campuses, it was giving a lot of headache. Now our opponents have no, well, they will find something, but their work will be much more difficult because now both the previous Republican president and the Democratic president, today's president of America, said, what is international definition? It says that some criticism of Israel can become anti-Semitic. When there's demonization of Israel, when there's the double standard of Israel, the legitimization, that's anti-Semitic. And I hope that will make our work with the Jewish students easier. So it's still, we have to be cautious in our optimism. But that was a good sign. Gil, you can definitely make deeper.
The 3 Ds, which are the basis of the international definition, demonization, delegitimization, double standards, which Natan developed, have been an important tool in drawing a line. But unfortunately, we've already seen 2 things. One, the Abraham Accords doesn't stop anti-Zionism and doesn't stop anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, because it's not about that. It's essentialist. It's about us. There's something about us. And somehow or other, we find, the expression being more, holier than the Pope. So we now have on university campuses, I know many of our Hillel contacts, Natan and I had a very sobering yet inspiring interaction with Hillel students where they said that they were just experiencing one of their worst summers ever, one of their worst falls ever, despite the Abraham Accords. Why? Because as long as there's one last Palestinian who's still fighting, the progressives will rally around them. Saudi Arabia can start becoming more pro-Israel, and Abu Dhabi, and there can be such an incredible enthusiasm in the UAE for these new ties. It's not just the Israeli side, but what's even more sobering than that is, I'm sorry to say, my American Jewish friends are not that excited about the Abraham Accords because that is the mark of Trump on it. Because the partisan polarization is so great, the partisan divide is so great that there's an ambivalence about the Abraham. I mean, people have been yelling peace now for so long, right? Turns out that it's only certain kinds of pieces of peace now that excites people. So that's one dimension to it. Second dimension, if that made my right-wing friends happy, I'm going to make my right-wing friends a little uncomfortable. I don't like to predict. I say as a historian, it's hard enough to predict the past. I can't begin to predict the future. But inevitably, there's going to be some tensions between the Biden administration and Israel. But as Natan said, Joe Biden has been a friend of Israel for many, many decades. You want to criticize him? Fine. Do not call him anti-Israel. That phrase, we know on university campuses, we know in the Arab world, we know in Europe what that really means, right? And to apply it to someone like Joe Biden would be a distortion and really makes us look foolish. We have to, if we do have moments of disagreement with Joe Biden, we have to approach it with subtlety. And we have to basically build on this great breakthrough with the IHRA and build on this great breakthrough with the Abraham Accords and say, look, yes, an intelligent president takes the best of his predecessors and builds on it and puts his or her brand on it. One of these days it will be a her. But also is able to distance himself from the other things about Donald Trump if you wish to. But don't take the whole package. And one last thought, because I know it's getting late. 3 thoughts, actually. Iran, Iran, Iran. Ultimately, we know that the heart of the Abraham Accords wasn't just a love affair with the Jews, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The whole process that started with Barack Obama being a little bit blindsided and having a blind spot vis-a-vis Iran meant Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia said, who's our enemy that unites us? Iran. So that's the first element of the glue. The second element of the glue is that we in Israel are very aware of the fact that the great threat to Israel's existence is not from the Palestinians, but from the Iranians. And third, again, I turn to my American Jewish friends and I say, how come you're not with us on this? How come you think you know more than even many left-wing Israelis who on this one issue, and we Jews are champion debaters and Israelis have PhDs in debating, and yet there was a consensus from left to right that the Iran deal was bad. And yet living 6,000 miles away, you tell us, no, it's fine. And so I call on my American Jewish friends to, and of course not all my American Jewish friends had that approach, but unfortunately the bulk said, well, if Barack Obama likes it, and now if many of Joe Biden's team who boast that this is their greatest foreign policy achievement like it, then it must be good. It may not be good. In fact, for us, it was bad. And on the final note, I often say God bless America, but I also say God bless Canada. We know that Canadian Jews have a much higher percentage of Jewish education, have a much higher percentage of people like Barbara Kay who stand up for us. We have a much higher percentage of Rabbi Cohns who stand up and create quality Jewish life. And we know that Canadian Jews, as a result, have a much lower intermarriage rate, have a much higher percentage of visits to Israel and of donations to Israel and of love of Israel. And they have really Pilates Judaism. And unfortunately, as an American who spent 20 years teaching in Canada, I know that Canadians are often following the American American trends. Maybe we can do a jujitsu, JEW, and start having our American Jewish friends learn more from the Canadian Jewish community. And that's my blessing for Pesach and for the month of Nisan, and to thank you for your for all your help. And to remind you, of course, that the book is called Never Alone.
Yes, buy the book.
300 shopping days to Hanukkah. So it's never too early to start building up your stock.
I just want everybody to know we have the seminary.ca at the bottom of your screen, the seminary.ca/lecture. You could purchase your own book of Never Alone, Prison Politics and My People by Gil Troy and Natan Sharansky. We could either have it shipped to your home or you could come and pick it up at our office. And I just want to finish off with one thing before we actually go to our finale video, which is a 3-minute video, and that is we're up to Pesach. Next, not this Tamshin Shabbat, the Shabbat later on Saturday night is the first Seder Pesach. In the first Seder Pesach, we say a line that everybody knows for the past hundreds of years. And it goes like this: Shebechol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu v'hakadosh baruch hu matzileinu miyadam. Whether it was the Holocaust, whether it was Haman in the time of Chashvarosh, whether it was the Crusades, whether it was any time during the years and the centuries of the Jewish people, Omdim aleinu lechalotenu, they stand up and they want to destroy, God forbid, and annihilate, God forbid, the Jewish people. V'hakadosh baruch hu matzileinu miyadam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us from every situation. So what Gil was saying, what Natan was saying in terms of pride, in terms of continuing by being Jewish, that is the recipe, or one of the components of the recipe, in order to make sure that although it's bechol dor vador, but nevertheless matzileinu miyadam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will save us and will continue with us because we are proud Jews, we are good Jews, we are good, and we do as much as possible to follow within the ways of what our ancestors taught us. So thank you, Natan and Gil. Thank you, Barbara. It was a beautiful, unbelievable event and session. I'm very proud that you were able to to be part of our session and of our listeners and everybody out there. We have listeners in Mexico City. We have a community in Mexico City that joins us. People in New York, Montreal, obviously. So all of you people who've joined us and have been with us, I want to thank each and every one of you, and tell everybody Chag Pesach Kasher v'Sameach, a happy and kosher Pesach. If you need shmura matzah, call our office. We'll have it.
Yeah. And in the spirit of Agadah, this year we are here, next year we are in Jerusalem.
Yes, Chabad Yerushalayim.
Okay.
There's a finale video. Ivri Anochi. Those who could stay with us, please do. Yossi, I want to thank Yossi, our IT. I want to also thank Miriam, my EA, my executive assistant. I want to thank all my staff in the office for a beautiful, beautiful session of everything organized well. Ladies and gentlemen, Ivri Anochi, please join us for the next 3 minutes.
רבות אברהם הזה בדרך, ואני הולך עם ראש למעלה, כל אחד הוא בנו בת של מלך. ככה היה וככה זה גם עלה, יהודים נשמה בוערת. בכל מקום ובכל ארץ, לא רוצה שיהיה אחרת. יהודי אני זה משהו נצחי, בני אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, בני שרה רבקה רחל ולאה, בני אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, בני שרה רבקה רחל ולאה. A little bit of history I've been through. Ask me where I'm from and I will tell you. I'm a Jew and every Jew's a proud Jew. Not just me, my sisters and my brothers. Never be ashamed to be a proud Jew. It's not what you've done, it's how he made you. So sing the song and spread the pride around you. Yehudi ani, eternally. Hey Abraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, b'nei Sarah Rivka, Rachel v'Leah. Hey Abraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, b'nei Sarah Rivka, Rachel v'Leah.
Great.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everybody enjoyed it. It's done by a Chabadnik. It's all for a Chabadnik. Everybody there was a Chabad. I don't know about the guys with the.
Yeah, I love the energy. Fantastic energy. That was great. I loved it. Thank you. I'm going to have to run now.
Perfect.
Yep.
I'll say goodbye.
Very much.
Thank you, Gil.
Bye-bye.
Great.
Yasher Koach. Okay. Bye-bye.
Chag Sameach. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Chag Sameach to you both.
Bye-bye.
Amen.